Well, hello, hello. It's DNN Dave, and I'm here with my friend and DNN community colleague, Aaron Lopez. Aaron, how you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good weather down here today. We're not being impacted by the hurricane, and that's good. So things are going well. How about up in your area?
Yeah, it's beautiful out today. So yeah, really excited to go out and play tennis later. And
Oh,
yeah,
nice. That's good. So, are temperatures good up there right now, or?
yeah, I'm in Western Canada, so and on an island, and yeah, it's really nice right now.
Oh man, some people have it rough living on an island and stuff. Are you're in what, British Columbia area? Is that
Yeah, that's
right? Yeah.
right. So I'm in Victoria, which is just west of Vancouver.
Okay. Okay. Excellent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
west
was
of where
up.
Dina started.
I visited that area when I was really young, but I don't remember it. I really don't. But from what I've heard, it's lovely up there.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Well, Aaron, tell me a little bit about you and your company. I'll be sure to share your website here as we go through it. But for those that don't know you, give us a little bit of intro of who you are, kind of what your background is, and your company.
Sure. Yeah. So um, I've been working in DNN since 2006. It was introduced to me by a developer in town who was building his own DNN websites, and it was really the first CMS that I've used, and really the only one that I've really used. And
Oh,
I got really into it, and I came at it from a sort of a front end developer perspective. So I was building themes and doing content production, just building websites for customers. Um,
nice.
so yeah, and then later started to branch out more into the sort of natural extension of front end development, which is the interface and design and UX and UI. So building modules with different teams in DNN mainly.
So let me get this straight. You love it when you're talking to others in the community and they're just pure developers and they just develop really cool stuff that doesn't look great, right?
It's my favorite thing.
You've got to love that,
I
right?
love, well, I do love it actually because that's my window of opportunity.
There you go.
Yeah.
No, it's
So
really great to have somebody in the community like you because I mean I've been following your blogs and I'm really impressed with your approach to things. So it's really cool. I mean, tell us a little bit about your company and your website here and how might people follow some of your blogs that you're creating out there.
yeah, so my company is Wolfex Machina, and it's myself, and I also work with a module developer who's a sort of a partner to me, and also other designers, and we create DNN websites and modules as well, and I also work on teams, DNN specific teams for some of my clients, and we build different modules and work on different websites.
Nice. Now, your blog, is it on this website or is it a separate website?
That's right. Yeah. So this is a blog I've run for the past 2.5 years or so, and so it's easy DNN news, and
Oh, cool.
yeah, I just run it on this website where I can talk about a lot of DNN stuff, some business and design, and I try to keep things really simple and really basic because I think that's um, sort of where I want to kind of go with it, just keeping things really simple and building up from there.
That's great. I've loved your blogs. They're very straightforward, easy to follow, and someone could read a blog and know exactly how to do that one thing that you're talking about. I know you're a structured content user. I think you use Too Sexy quite a bit, and some of that. And I've seen some of your blogs on those, and I'm like, oh, that's just so well written. So I appreciate you contributing that stuff out there and getting some good content out there.
Oh, my pleasure.
That's great. Well, I'll switch back over and focus on kind of talking. We're just going to have a little chat today about UI and UX and how that plays or can and should play a role leading up to development. So I know this is an area that you're really passionate about. So appreciate you joining and sharing a little bit of wisdom and dropping some knowledge to us today on this.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, just getting right into it. I mean, like, what is your mindset when you have a development challenge or something that a feature or some kind of something that needs to be developed for a client? Like, what is your mindset when you start the process?
Well, I come from, so I'm not a smart man, Dave. I'm not a
You could
programmer.
have fooled
I'm
me,
not
man.
that quick. And so, and working with different teams like project managers and marketing teams and customers themselves, and as a front end developer, I've always been sort of in between developers and project managers and the stakeholders and whatnot. And so, I go towards starting with what can we all sort of see and agree on in that sense. So having an interface in front of you, sort of, there's no, we're taking something that's in everybody's head and then making it standardized essentially. So that's sort of where I start with, because it kind of rules out a lot of things and it answers a lot of questions by having a prototype, even just a non-working prototype, but just a layout in front of a person, sort of clarifies a lot. So that's sort of where I start with.
I can't help but my mind just goes to some scenarios that we've faced in our company, with a client that comes to us, and it typically is very simple in the client's mind, right? I just need a simple store like Amazon. And I use that one as just a joke, but well, no, we've actually heard that before, but it's simple in their mind, but sometimes it's really hard to know what they're really thinking. So getting something from a design perspective in front so that it can be validated and confirmed, I guess, is pretty valuable in the development rather than just jumping right in. I mean, do you think about I guess it depends on the project, but are you thinking about what this thing might look like on a mobile device or something like that first, or are you kind of just looking at what the challenge is and making it focus on that view, if you would?
Yeah, so I mean, every project that I work on is basically design first. So it actually depends on sort of the content first, I would say. So, for example, if I said to you, I want to design a listing of, let's say, a staff directory.
Yeah.
Well, the design would change and the code would change depending on how many staff members you're going to put in that listing. Let's say that there were 5 people because it's a small company.
Yeah.
That might be one design, and that might mean certain HTML and CSS and JavaScript. But if I said to you, there's actually 5 board members, 10 managers, and 100 staff, that's going to define the layout completely differently than if it were just 5 people. And so when you start from that content and do the design first, you actually end up creating the code that's going to work for that design and that user experience. And so the nice thing about that too is that if you're presenting that design to a client, they're going to know immediately what works for them and what doesn't. Other than, because if you just say, oh, well, there's going to be, I'm making a staff listing and I don't know how many people are in that listing, then you might design it or you might build it a certain way that doesn't really account for those different scenarios.
That's true. So, I mean, it makes me think of, okay, well, a typical developer, and I hate to stereotype, but, we're kind of wired to jump into solution space really quickly, right? I might say, okay, it's a list of employees or whatever, or a team director or something. So I might start building something, but my mindset would be, well, I'm not a designer. I don't really know that kind of stuff, but I do have in my brain what I want to build, right? I,
Hmm.
I might also be thinking that that's going to take a lot of time, maybe because of my skill set, or maybe because I, just dismiss it. I mean, what would you say to a developer that is thinking that way? Would you say that they should probably team up with someone that knows that kind of world to validate first? I mean, and is that going to be an increase in time and potentially money and that kind of thing? I mean, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, we're all developing interfaces in a sense. Whether you're
Yeah.
doing it intentionally or unintentionally, you're creating an interface that someone is using. So it's going to be your users, your customers, and you as a developer. So um, I think that what happens is that we kind of just jump straight into development, make something, and then show the client, and then they say what's wrong with it, and then you have to go back in that process to get
Mm,
an interface that works for them. But if you start up front with the interface, then you've saved that iteration essentially,
mm. Yeah,
because you
I
have
guess
to do
that.
the interface anyways.
Yeah, and I guess that iteration could be simple, but it may be a redo of the whole thing, right? I mean, it
Totally.
could be quite costly, I suppose. I know I've gone down that path before and gotten in trouble because I was
That's
so
right.
sure in my mind that this was going to work, but it had not been validated, visually with the client that yeah, we built something that was really really cool, but it wasn't what they were thinking at all. We just thought we understood.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, there's a really good example I came across recently. I'm working on a new module, and it's a vendor integration directory, and they're wanting 100 results in this directory. And when you
Mm,
get up to like 100 results, that's when you start to need pagination, probably
right.
search, probably categorization. But if they only had 10, you probably don't need any of those components. And so when you're starting a project, knowing, oh, you have all these items that you have to account for, and you have to have the user experience figured out, it defines how you go with the project. And so, you know, if they had 10, maybe we don't need all that extra development time for pagination and stuff like that. So knowing it straight ahead and being able to show that to a person and have them approve it saves a lot of time and a lot of development time, and therefore money.
I could see that big time. So I mean, like, how do you get excited about that approach if you're a developer? I mean, I'm asking you to speak to the developer because I believe we need help. In this
Mhm.
mindset. How does a developer get excited about that aspect of it? I mean, are there some benefits to the developer in their work having gone through a process of design first?
Well, I mean, I can speak to that as a front end developer myself. I work a
Yeah.
lot with Too Sexy Content and Razor templates, and so creating the design first. This is just my own perspective, but I like to go when I'm developing from point A to point B as much as I can. And so that means having a design in front of me and being like, this is exactly where I need to go,
Mm,
and just writing only the code, the lean code that I need. I don't really like having to try to figure different things out on the fly. And
mm,
so that's really exciting for me because it lets me see my designs come to life. It lets me see the work come to life a lot quicker and a lot easier as well.
Now I have to ask. This is out of left field here, but are you a musician by any chance?
Not at all. I
Okay.
am not
Okay.
artistic. I'm actually that's my I'm not artistic at all.
I don't know.
I'm
I don't know if it's
yeah.
the look or what, but I'm thinking, man, that guy's got to be a guitarist or something.
I cannot play an instrument for the life of me.
No, my brain goes to music sometimes. As you were talking about, I guess it's a bit of comfort and assurance to the developer if they have something in front of them that they're building. They're not trying to figure out what they're building while they're building it. So I kind of liken it to like um, a young drummer that's being a part of a band, but man, they need to play to a metronome, a
Right.
synced time. And at first, that is such a painful thing. You feel like it's fighting against you, but in reality, it's perfect. And you're not, so you got to kind of get used to that thought process. But in talking to a seasoned drummer that has played with a click, all the time, man, it's a comfort to them because they don't have to think about that. They're just going to sit in the pocket, so to speak, and it's a bit of a comfort. So I think it probably is a bit of a process, right, for the developer to get into this mindset, but that investment might pay off,
Totally.
with that comfort, as well as the end product would be really what it needs to be, nothing more, nothing less.
That's exactly it. And I think too, when I create my designs and then I start to work on them in, actually developing out, there's still room for changes and there's still sort of room for inspiration and creativity,
Yeah.
figuring out the technical aspects of it. Like I think that you use too sexy content. There's presentation options. So figuring out how to get different presentation options working well and seamlessly within the module is a really exciting aspect, and that sort of, you can't always account for that in the design process, and that's sort of another layer that you get to enjoy, I guess, as a developer. But the design, definitely, I think having the design first just saves you a lot of the time of going backwards, and that's
Yeah.
what we kind of want to prevent. Is, there's still room for kind of flowing through and discovering what works the best for something, but it's the wastefulness I'm trying to reduce, I guess, in the design.
Right. I mean, speaking of that, I've heard you use the term epicenter design. Like, what do you mean by that? Tell me a little bit about what that is.
Yeah, so a lot of the design sort of concepts, I haven't invented any of these. These are just things I've picked up over the years. But epicenter design is starting with the most important thing or the central thing. And so, for example, if you're going to design a page, let's say, I use the staff listing example a lot because I
Yeah.
think that's a really common one. But on a staff listing page, the most important thing is, let's say, generally it's telling the story of the company, and
Mm.
it's the people at that company. And so you would start with the smallest component, which is, let's say, a person, and
Mm.
then you create a larger component, which is the team,
Ah.
and then you
Yeah.
create a larger component, which is the company as a whole, and then
Mm.
you go outwards and you create the header and footer of the page. In some cases your header and footer are probably already designed, but the idea is starting with the smallest things and then
Yeah.
building outwards the smallest, most important things, and then building outwards from there.
That's kind of a cool way to approach it. And I think about that from a development standpoint. I usually start with the database and thinking of what entities I need, right? And then you build out from there because it makes sense, even to me as a developer. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So like, I guess I'm gonna shift into more of a UX mentality here. I I love the story of the Amazon continue button, right? Jared Spool. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. There was this problem on the Amazon site with the user experience, getting to a certain place. And Jared Spool came in, he's known in the UX world. He comes in, and he's like, yeah, yeah, let's change the word on that button to continue. And it saved them or made them millions,
Yeah.
took 2 seconds. So how important are the words, for the various actions in your approach?
Extremely important. So there's actually kind of two things I think are really important there. Is um, words I think are almost the first things I'd start figuring out when I'm creating like forms and buttons and stuff. It's not even the layout of the fields or anything like that, because there's a difference between if you have a button that says submit
Mm,
and one that says save and one that
mm.
says save profile,
Oh,
because you're
yeah.
you're changing the meaning of that button. You're changing it from submit, which sounds like you're sending something, which I guess in a sense you are. You're sending it to the server and
Hmm.
maybe it's sending you something back. Saving, maybe you're saving something, but what are you saving? And then
Hmm.
having saving profile, getting to that third place, a very, very specific, makes a huge difference for the user. And so making sure your labels all have really meaningful words and starting there really, really helps as well. Helps
Doesn't that
clarify
give,
things.
I guess it gives the user some sense of assurance too, that they can feel confident that they know what's going to happen when they click that button. Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, another small example would be, I think there's a trend that you see on forums. People write go, but you're
Yeah.
not really going anywhere. You're
Right.
searching.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, I mean, just being really specific and about your words makes a big difference because, people are reading. I know they
Now,
say they scan websites, but they do read
I,
those labels.
they do, whether subconsciously or yeah, for reals.
Yeah.
But yeah. So all right, okay. Let's go to a scenario. I've got a massive form that I need to create on a page. Let's say it's an application for a job,
Okay.
and it's got tons of fields to it. Now, the client says to me, I don't want them to have to scroll too much. So I go, should I just go and like just try to cram as much into that, space as I can, Aaron? Or would you argue that point?
I mean, it depends. I've built some pretty big forms, and it depends because I built some big forms that on one page, totally fine. It just,
Yeah.
just the type of content, the type of steps they're going through. Um, but sometimes you got to break it up into different steps. But what I would say, like if you're having a multi-step wizard, what I would say is definitely having some kind of indicators at the top to just
Yeah.
show that person where they are in this stage.
So they know how far they've got to go, I guess, and where they're at in that process. But
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
how important is like the spacing of things and that being consistent versus a bit awkward due to the different controls that are being used and stuff like that? How much of a role does that play into it?
Yeah, I mean that's huge, and I think that's one of the biggest things that you see on the web in general and in DNN as well, is that there's just a lack of spacing, a lack of
Yeah.
alignment, and consistency across elements. And if that's actually one of the easiest things you can do is just change the. I think your
My
dog agrees.
dog has seen something that he wants. It's actually an Amazon delivery, so I'll try to mute here.
No worries. But yeah, so that's actually one of the easiest things you can do is just make the spacing and margins between things consistent, and that makes a huge, huge difference in your interfaces. And so if you have, let's say you have a heading and then a paragraph and then a button, if you make the margins between them all the same, like let's say it's 30 pixels, just make that consistent, and that will definitely improve the legibility of your website, and it'll make it a lot nicer and easier to look at. And then in terms of alignment, there's a really common scenario. Let's say that you have an icon with a heading beside it, and then you have a paragraph below those. If you let the icon sort of float offset of that column, and so the heading still aligns with the paragraph and the button, that looks really nice compared to having the icon align with the top of the paragraph.
So there's a
Just
bit
little things
of
like that.
yeah, that's kind of interesting. I mean, so you're saying there's some real thought process that needs to go into use of icons and I guess labels and headings and those type of things and what how the text alignment is and all that. I mean, how do
Yeah,
you approach iconography? Because it's sometimes it's really straightforward. I find but depending on what library maybe you're using or not using it, it can be difficult sometimes. To actually pick the right icon.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I use Font Awesome. I have
Yeah,
a pro account. I think it's definitely worth it because those icons are pretty nice and there's lots of them,
a lot more
and
options, I guess, too, with
a
the
lot more
pro account. Yeah.
options. Yeah. And
Yeah.
on that note, actually, sort of something I was kind of mentioning earlier is when you have labels. So this is a common thing you kind of see, and I think it's a mistake, is that people have interfaces where they have icons, but there's no text beside them. And icons can mean different things to different people, and it depends on how good that icon is. Um, Generally, if you have some icon, you should probably have a label attached to it because the or some actual text because that really helps the user understand. And so when you get those things working together, that's the best way to do that, I would say. There's a lot of examples where people just have just the icon, but I would say you definitely need some text with it.
Now, I know this is not something that we really discussed talking about, but I'll throw it in here just because it's tangentially related, I believe. Speak just a minute to how color plays a role in things and maybe accessibility as well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, so generally speaking, there's no hard and fast rules, but I would say generally speaking, keep your headings and your body copy um, like very dark gray
Mm,
or close to black,
yeah.
because that's just easiest for everybody. The way that I generally like to do it is like I create sketches and then wireframes,
Mm,
and like the when it comes to color, in regards to like branding,
mm,
those things I like those things to come out in the graphics and maybe the icons,
ah,
and the occasional gradient on a title, but keeping your headings and your text all very simple, is the way that I like to do it.
I
So
guess that's
keeping
more
those
for
things working.
readability too, and not having it just overload. I guess of because I've seen well, and there's kind of this argument in the space of what branding really is when it comes to the content and all that. How
Mhm.
is it really using the colors literally from the logo, or is it more to it than that? And I guess the more sophisticated the client is, the more advanced their style guide might be for branding. But I we we shouldn't lose sight of the purpose of that content. And that's content. Make it readable, don't confuse the user in the end, just to accentuate the brand and all
Yeah,
that, right? Yeah.
exactly. I think far too often you see people who are wanting to introduce branding colors into a design, and what they end up doing is just applying those colors to any text that's not, that color yet. So they'll just see a
Yeah.
heading, they'll go, oh, it has to be the brand color green, and this subheading has to be the brand color orange.
Yeah, and
And
then
that's
you get into
yeah.
challenges when the brand has, like, for instance, a yellow and a red in it.
Hmm.
Well, your button colors, then there's some problems with red buttons. It seems like that's a danger or a delete or that kind
Yeah.
of thing. So it's not always strict rule to it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, and about like meaning. So red, yeah, generally means like, you're deleting something or there's a danger. And it's interesting because there's one specific instance in a DNN module I see every few weeks when I have to activate a license where it shows this glaring red message
Yeah.
and it says, "Don't worry, it's activating."
Don't
And I'm
worry.
like, but I am worried because you just showed me this huge red banner.
Right.
Show me a orange one or a yellow one, like a warning.
Yeah.
Don't or a notification blue.
Yeah.
Don't show me red unless something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. You
That's
know.
interesting. Well, I mean, let's wrap up talking about accessibility for just a second and how big of a role. I know that's not always the goal with a particular implementation, but how much does it play a role into this mindset of design and the user experience there?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does because, the interface is what people use, regardless if it's, you're a disabled person or whatever. Um, so starting from that point of view, I mean, you can test it immediately before you get into development. So you
Yeah.
can test your screen reading capabilities. You can test the design if it's actually going to work for visually impaired people or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that we could probably dig into with that. But man, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk through some of this stuff. I mean, I know this is high level, this is introductory, but maybe there's some good value proposition that you've brought to at least some developers out there that are wanting to refine their craft, and own in on this thought process of design first strategy on development there. So really appreciate it. Again, this is Aaron Lopez, and he's with Wolf X Machina. Is
yeah,
that right? My
right.
brain has always said machina. I'm like, what does that mean? But I know there's probably a story behind that name too. Is it a quick one?
I mean, I just thought, what is the most pretentious name I could call my company? No, I'm just kidding.
That is great.
It's a long one. I'll explain it another time, maybe.
Okay, that's great. Well, let's do a follow up. What I'd love to do is, if you're open to it, do a couple of these that we kind of dig into a few examples, and you can give us a bit of a walkthrough of the mindset that you had through it, and really kind of get down to some real meat in this process instead of just talking about it. If you're open to that.
Yeah, I would love that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Dan and Dave. This is Aaron Lopez. Hope you got something out of this. Be sure to smash or click or like the subscribe and hit notify and all that good stuff. And do share the video if you find this valuable for you or for any of your colleagues. Feel free to do that. And we'll see you next time. Take care.